Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet. This is Hustler from Winnipeg Sports Talk. He's going to be covering off the bases here before Ken Wiebe gets here. Ken Wiebe, of course, is writing, taking care of business, dissecting that series. But I don't mind. I don't mind at all because I love hearing his entry music. It's absolutely awesome stuff. Huss, I think you've probably seen it. You make an appearance in the video.
Absolutely. Definitely. That might be the highlight of round two, Sean, to be honest. The debut of Ken's, when we think about all the great things that happened over the past week, that's number one. And I don't know, maybe you can tell me number two.
I know. We're going to have to figure this out. I wanted to give a shout out to the chat room who's here early as usual. We are going to do a season dissection after garbage bag day and the locker clean out and all that kind of stuff. We'll get into that kind of stuff. That's when we'll have the conversations about Paul Morrisse's future and trades and all that kind of stuff. We'll try tonight here to keep this to, a conversation of what happened in tonight's game and what happened in the series and what didn't happen. Clearly, there was a lot of that going on. But let's just start out here, Huss. Give me an example of how you were feeling tonight and what you thought of what we saw tonight.
Well, listen, first up, you and Ken are the big J journos around here. I think everyone know I'm pretty clear being a Winnipeg guy. I've never thought that I had to remove myself from caring about the team. I sat here like everyone in the room watching the game, wanting this team to show up with a much better performance and show the good Jets that we've seen at times this season. And we certainly did in that first series. And I tweeted it out. It was almost merciful that it ended the way that it did, Sean, because if you're a Jet fan and you watch those last 4 games over 6 days, that was like a 6-day root canal done by maybe a dentist that doesn't have proper teaching. It was painful. And the game tonight, listen, first things first, Connor Hellebuyck is incredible. The fight that he showed, bailing his team out over and over and over again was admirable. And knowing that he still has 3 more years on this deal, I think you can really look at, this team has a backbone, a foundation to win some games. But man, I know the Scheifele, the suspension was controversial, but it was what it was. We knew that he was going to be out for these 4 games. And I know we had talked before about, and this wasn't just in this market, about the depth of the Winnipeg Jets. This was the opportunity for that depth to show itself. And man, you look at those forwards and what the production or lack thereof throughout this series. And it's a bitter, bitter way to end the season for the hockey club, for the organization, the players, and the fans. There was so much optimism and excitement in this city just 1 week ago going into game 1, which incredibly was on Wednesday night, Sean. And now it's over. We're going to have a Wednesday garbage bag day for the Winnipeg Jets. And considering the fact that they were favorites going into this series, it is somewhat stunning that it finished as quickly as it did. But make no mistake about this. This wasn't the Edmonton series, which was incredibly close, was a razor-thin margin. I heard Wheeler talk about, how close everything is.
Closer than we thought, yeah.
This series wasn't close. This series was not close. I know game 2 was close on the scoreboard, but listen, it's incredibly disappointing, and all the positive and the goodwill that I think that series against Edmonton earned them. It was sort of, one step forward, one step back, and major questions about what happened to the Winnipeg Jets in this series beyond the obvious players that were missing from the lineup.
So I'm going to describe that series. This is the analogy I've been using. That series looked to me like a wrestling match. And how does every wrestling match start? Unless, the one guy's taking his robe off and gets clocked from behind. And maybe that's a good analogy too in this situation. But it was like a wrestling match where 2 guys lock up and the one guy instantly slips underneath the arm, puts the guy in a chokehold. And that's game 1. And then game 2, 3, and 4 is the ref lifting the Jets' arm up and dropping it. 1, 2, 3, and they're out. It seemed like complete and total domination. We all know, we heard the stats about the Montreal Canadiens never trailing at any point in this series. But last show, I don't know if you heard us, but last game reminded me of Game 6 in 2019 against the St. Louis Blues, in that it just seemed like in that game where the Jets needed to show, they did not show up in that game. I felt like last game was like that. This game, I mean, if Logan Stanley doesn't go blast in 2 shots and it ends up being, it scores those goals and it ends up being a 2-0 game, like how disheartening would that have been? I know this ends in overtime and them getting swept, it doesn't save a lot, but the Jets more likely deserve to lose that game 2-0 and just be absolutely snuffed out the way the Montreal Canadiens were doing. It was back to, and a question was asked about it. I mean, it was a little bit of Winnipeg Jets hockey that they loved to say at the beginning of the year was stay in the fight and survive, getting your butts kicked around the ice for the game, and then you somehow find a way to pull it out. I was thinking, well, and I was saying to my guy, Eric Engels from Sportsnet in Montreal, as we're watching the game, I said, they do this all the time. Like they do this thing where they sit there and that they do the old rope-a-dope and stand there and take 1,000 shots in the game, and then all of a sudden they come out, boom, and they score and they win. And I really thought that we were on the way to doing doing that tonight. Didn't happen. Instead, what happened was probably what deserved to happen. The Montreal Canadiens win that game.
Oh, no
they won the other 4. They were clearly the better team in this. I'm interested in your talk about the bitter end, not just for the fans, but for the players, for the organization itself. I wonder, because I'm trying to think of a time last year in the bubble with both Scheifele and Laine going down the way that they did, and with COVID and them coming back. And, I thought that the Jets were behind the 8 ball in the bubble last year because so many of their players got back so late. I can't remember the Jets leaving the playoffs with as unsatisfying an exit at this. And it's strange to say that because they went to the second round this year, right? And they'd only been past the second round once before this since coming back in 2011. But I do have to say that bitter end you're talking about, I wonder how that bitter taste sits with the rainmakers in this organization, the Kevin Cheveldayoffs, the Mark Chipmans, even the Paul Maurices. What are your thoughts on the kind of how this leaves those rainmakers feeling?
Not good, Sean. Not good. Incredibly disappointed. And listen, they'll get away from this series for a few days and maybe look back. And we hear Maurice in particular. I mean, this, for crying out loud, through this series, I mean, the message, they would come out after the games and say they like their game. I mean, they like their game. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that goes all the way up. I saw Mark Chipman and Kevin Cheveldayoff sitting there tonight watching that game. There was a few clips we saw on the national broadcast, and they did not look happy. I know Mark Chipman is an incredibly competitive individual. This one's going to sting. I think Kevin Cheveldayoff's in that same boat. But again, I guess if you're getting to a bigger question about, would they consider changes? I think that threesome is committed to each other. And to be honest, for the people that, were, calling for Paul Maurice's head at the end of the season, I thought that the sweep over Edmonton and the way that the Jets, performed and the way he prepared them and the way they showed out was big for Maurice. I think it was a huge step forward that got some of the heat off of him. To me, this is, 4 steps forward in the Edmonton series and 4 steps straight back to where we were. Maybe it'll be enough going forward. I mean, I don't think this is such a disaster that, they decide to blow it all up or go a different direction. But I certainly think that, assuming that they come back with that same management structure, I think the miserable finish to this season does sort of ramp up a little bit more pressure to go forward. But you heard Maurice say afterwards, I mean, they're thinking big picture, long term. He said this team's going to be really good. There's some good young players here going forward. I mean, it's almost like they thought that this was a unique opportunity to maybe win this division, but they didn't really consider themselves Stanley Cup contenders. But they have a plan, and moving forward, the team will be better and more competitive. And, from a fan standpoint, you'd certainly hope that was true. But again, just, with the response of the team on the ice, the guys that were there, that's what's so concerning, Sean. I mean, listen, you can lose games and, the team certainly will. And, Montreal, I think we now know, was clearly a better team and more prepared and better ready to handle this matchup than the Winnipeg Jets were. But it was, the lack of, I mean, I don't know what you want to call it. I mean, will's maybe a strong word, but it certainly seemed like in every game, the Montreal Canadiens wanted it more. And it boils down to playoff hockey comes down to the small battles. And it was no contest. I mean, they were more tenacious, they were more aggressive, their sticks were better, they won every battle on the board. I mean, it was, I don't want to say it was a no-show, but listen, we were waiting for somebody of those forwards to step up and when the team needed it. And it was Logan Stanley with 2 miracle goals that sort of put lipstick on a pig and made the final score look a little bit better today. But make no mistake about it, this is easily as miserable a finish to the season as 2019 in St. Louis in the Game 6, which most people said that was a best-of-5 series. When the Jets lost Game 5 at home the way they did, that was it. They played like it in Game 6, and it's hard to look at the way the Jets showed up for these last couple games and didn't think that they, in some ways, had already lost the series.
So no one stepped up. Who needed to? Who were the guys that we hang this on? Who are the leaders in this room that we say, Mark Scheifele's out, you needed to step up in this series?
Kyle Connor, Blake Wheeler, Nikolai Ehlers, Pierre-Luc Dubois. I mean, Paul Stastny's situation's a little different. He was injured and obviously not at 100%, and he came back. But I mean, you can't lose one player and have all your high-powered offense go completely ice cold. And I bring up Connor first because not only was he, unable to, to really, make much happen offensively, but he was also, the direct result of, a few very bad plays that ended up in the Jets' own net. In particular, the play in game number 2 that resulted in the shorthanded goal. Connor's an incredible player. Much more dangerous when Scheifele's there, but I think you certainly needed more. And listen, I got a lot of time for the effort and the leadership that Blake Wheeler shows. But, if you're playing on that top line, you're getting all those minutes, you're getting paid more than anybody else. You have to produce in some ways. And, unfortunately, the top players for the Winnipeg Jets just simply did not do that, Sean. And, that's going to be a big question as to how that happened and how Montreal was able to completely smother and dominate the Jets' top players that, at times, again, we keep going back. This wasn't a one-man team. But you can sort of make the argument that it was offensively when you see what happens when Mark Scheifele's out of the lineup.
Yeah. It's interesting. I love the way you answered that question, by the way. You just ticked off the boxes. That was phenomenal. No messing around, calling it exactly how it is. I wonder about Blake Wheeler. This is 2 years after Mark Scheifele is lost in the playoffs. You're waiting for someone to kind of take over. He's the $8 million man, right? And I know he's not the youngest anymore, and sometimes your contract doesn't say everything about you. But we were told in the beginning of the season when Blake Wheeler was injured and we found out that he had cracked ribs, that, he wasn't at his best and just you wait and see and he'd be back. Do you not get the sense that a Wheeler of a couple of years ago would have been taking the puck to the net? I mean, in a series where for sure in game 2, I know they said it before game 1, but in game 2, in game 3, and in game 4, the message was we need to get to the net. And in games 2 and 3, they simply did not at all. I mean, where's that drive? Where's your 6'5" captain driving the puck to the net? Where's, to your point, Pierre-Luc Dubois? Like, these were the guys who were supposed to get it done. And I wonder about their inability to get to the net and to use that element of size because it just never materialized.
You know where it started, Sean? At the blue line. I mean, we talk a lot about boxing out and giving, the goaltender the space to see in front of the net and the blue paint. In this series, the Habs were boxing them out at the blue line. I mean, by the time the wingers, if they ever even were able to get a zone entry with the puck on their stick, they were 2 feet from the boards almost every single time. So, to be able to do that, you need to get through the defense. And, it was a combination of not being able to, to make it a one-man show and do it one-on-one. The Habs defense was just too good. And, from a design and tactics perspective, they never changed anything up. They never really figured out a more effective way to do that. And I'm sure I wasn't the only person that was having, flashbacks to the Edmonton series with all the dump-ins on Mike Smith that simply were picked up by Mike Smith and, a great puck handler goaltender, one pass, and it's going the other way. Carey Price, I don't think, is in the Mike Smith level when it comes to handling the puck, but he's good enough. I mean, he had the time to do it. And, they did that over and over to the Winnipeg Jets. And that's a big part of the reason why, it was over 2-1 in zone time. The shots were, what was it, 41-16?
42-16.
42-16. And I got to tell you, that is as accurate. Sometimes you'll say, the shots, they didn't really tell the story. They absolutely told the story of this game tonight, Sean.
Yeah. 10 ball goat. You picked the Jets in 5. Be ashamed, dude. That's me. He's right. I'm willing to take my lumps. I never said I was a pro at those things. Like I'd said, I'm perfect outside the North Division, but I've absolutely botched the North Division in looking at that. Huss, in your breakdown of the blue line, I'll go a step further, especially in the third period of that game. There was a point where the Jets couldn't seem to pass the puck across their own blue line. How many times did the Montreal Canadiens turn that puck over and just keep coming at them wave after wave after wave? And I mean, you saying what you said, and there never kind of being a change or an answer. We talked about Kyle Connor. We talked about Nick Ehlers. We talked about Blake Wheeler. We talked about Pierre-Luc Dubois. But Paul Maurice has to own a massive chunk of this. In a series where their systems seem to be clearly in favor of the Montreal Canadiens. Paul Maurice had no answer for what Dominic Ducharme was putting out there on the ice. And maybe you want to say that it's and let's give credit where it's due. The Montreal Canadiens, I remember at the beginning of the season saying, the way this team is built, they can be built to be a really good playoff team if they buy in and all get together. Now, it looked like the majority of the season they weren't going to do that. But once they did that, you could see every single piece on that team was a cog in the machine that was running finely tuned. But if you're Paul Maurice and his coaching staff, it's your job to find a way to break through that system. It seems clear to me they never found a way. Oh,
Sean, you are 100% correct. And listen, fair is fair. Paul Maurice deserved and got a lot of credit for the way the Jets came out, against a team that had beat them 6 times in a row. They'd had no success and gotten their lunch eaten by Connor McDavid like no team in the National Hockey League. They prepared for it. They were ready for it. They played. They managed the puck well. They executed properly. They fought incredibly hard, and they were rewarded for it. Paul Maurice gets a lot of credit for what happened in round 1. But if you're going to give the coach the credit for round 1, you have to also look at what happened in round 2 and say, what happened? And I'll say this. We went into this series. There was a lot of things when you were looking at the Habs and the Winnipeg Jets and advantages and disadvantages on both sides. You had one coach coming in with 1,700 games or whatever it is, like all the incredible experience that Paul Maurice has, nearly unmatched in the National Hockey League, against a guy with 45 games under his belt that came in as an interim coach midseason.
Right.
I'm sorry, but this is a tough look for Paul Maurice. Coming out of this series, the way things transpired and the way the Jets had absolutely no answers and, did not figure out a way to, listen, I can guess today's game was technically interesting on the scoreboard because Stanley had those 2 shots past Carey Price. But overall, this was an absolute mismatch. And, I think Murat was going through some of the numbers. This is one of the most lopsided series ever, according to some of the advanced numbers. And, unfortunately for Maurice, a lot of the goodwill that I think he and the coaching staff earned with some skeptical fans in round 1 evaporated in 4 quick games against the Montreal Canadiens.
I want to touch on your point of both the first round and the second round. What impressed me about Paul Maurice and the Winnipeg Jets in the first round is Paul Maurice said what the Winnipeg Jets were going to have to do to succeed in the playoffs, and they did that. They did exactly what he said they were going to need to do. They executed it. So to me, that was like a clear game plan, a winning game plan, a properly executed game plan. That's good coaching, right? Because you get your players on board with it. You build the right plan, and they pulled that off. And to your point, they did that. They deserve the credit for that. But what he said they needed to do in the second round never materialized. It never happened. So again, we got to get to the front of the net. We got to do this. We got to get traffic there. It never happened. Any of those things, they never happened. So to your point, it was just a stirring victory, a stirring coaching victory in round 1. And to your point, just an absolute lack of a plan that ever came into semblance or ever got put together. And that's what I'm going to leave it on that note before we bring our man, Ken Wiebe, who's ready to join us here. My favorite part of the show. I love to rock out to this song. Let's bring it in. Enter Kenny. He's here, everybody. What took so long? Absolutely excellent. Love bringing in Ken Weeb. I love seeing you at the best of times, but adding that music, like the
Oh man.
oh, my friend, this is reaching legendary status. This is unbelievable stuff. Thanks for getting here, Kenny, as quick as you could. Kenny, what did you see tonight?
Well, we saw a team that just did not have much of a pushback. We know it was going to be a challenge, but that was we warned about the possibility earlier. That was very eerily reminiscent. I'm guessing you've already gone here, but eerily reminiscent of Game 6 in 2019 against the St. Louis Blues.
I think we landed on before you got here. I think I at least had landed on Game 3. Reminded me of Game 6 against the Blues. This was a new level for me. Even though they take it to overtime, this was a new level for me.
Man, sorry, no, don't be sorry at all. I mean, it's tough to put into words. That's why it took me so long to finish that column. I mean, it's baffling. Quite personally, there just was not much pushback. I mean, we know it wasn't from a lack of wanting or trying, but this team just could not generate at 5-on-5 in this series. There's really discombobulation was a word that came to mind. I mean, we've talked about the line juggling, and I didn't personally see a lot of chemistry on any lines tonight. No. Nikolai Ehlers didn't have a lot of help. One really nice play, Kyle Connor to Paul Stastny in tight, but I really just didn't see any cohesion, right? I mean, Huss, we've talked about this, you and I, Sean, you and I, where was the cohesion? There just was not any. We know that, of course, the Jets missed Mark Scheifele, but to me, this is starting to dig a little bit deeper, guys, right? I mean, if this happens 2 years in a row, there's not enough depth here, right? If the scoring runs dry 2 years in a row, some changes need to be considered. We know there's already been a massive change to the core group this year, and it obviously didn't reap any immediate dividends. But wow, it's just one thing some folks are going to naturally say this is an excuse. I'm very curious to see what happens next. I think getting out of the COVID bubble will certainly help the Jets in some regards, but they need to be better defensively. Everything that we saw in the first round was not there. The puck management was poor. The defensive zone coverage was a struggle. I mean, there's no way around that. I mean, one player would have changed the series complexion, but I don't think it necessarily changes the outcome. No, I mean, it's one player was not going to be the difference. This is like our debate. If the Jets had gone out and gotten Ekholm, Ekholm would have helped the Jets, but Ekholm didn't make the Jets a Stanley Cup winner, I don't think. So which way are they going to be able to go? I think we talked about a little bit about it after last game. Sean, how are you going to line up this window? That is the biggest question to me. How are the Jets going to line up the window? Are you happy with what you have up front? And if you are, how do you equate that on the back end? Which prospect will you consider moving? I don't think it's as simple. I think the defense core is improved with Ville Heinola and Dylan Sandberg in there instead of someone on a UFA contract. But I think there still needs to be some stability. I mean, the Jets are going to have high character players on the roster, but they need to be making more of a contribution. This isn't about one individual person. Derek Forbort did a really nice job this year in the first half of the season. But in the second half, there were some struggles. But on the flip side, this was a player signed at basically $1 million contract. He should have been playing on the third pairing. When you ask someone to play above his steed, often there are issues. Yes, the stat sheet will say Nikolai Ehlers turned the puck over on that goal late in the final minute of the period, and it's true. With the one hand, he did turn it over. But that is all Derek Forbort losing control of the puck, and then to rub salt in the wound, his guy, actually, on one of the rare occasions the Jets boxed out properly, the player still manages to tip it out of the air for a perfect deflection. That is the microcosm of this series for the Winnipeg Jets. The one time they actually boxed the player out properly, it still ended up in a perfect goal, which was an absolute, could have been a backbreaker. Somehow the Jets get back in it with two Logan Stanley shots that Carey Price is still waiting to see. One was a complete whiff, and the other one off Paul Byron's stick. Sorry, I've been on a bit of a tangent here, but I'm very curious to see what happens next and what direction is taken on a lot of areas. I think tonight the Jets, I mean, again, some folks are going to say 2020 vision. That's not true. I check the receipts in my column. I think that Ville Heinola could have helped the Jets tonight. I mean, playing Logan Stanley was a smart move, obviously. He scored 2 goals and had a big impact. But in a game where the Jets again struggled with their exits, I mean, game-winning goal. Exit stage left, exit stage right. There's no exit happening. I mean, I'm sorry. They just didn't move the puck efficiently enough. I think the Jets missed David Gustafsson tonight. Some people will think that's ridiculous because Gustafsson barely played. But Gustafsson is a guy who has a big frame. He's smart enough to kill penalties. He has some offensive upside. The Jets need to have David Gustafsson in their lineup in October when the season starts. He's ready to be a player that can have an impact. And after that, let's see who else fits in where, because there are some pieces that need a jolt right now. I think that's what I come away from this series. And we know it wasn't a natural sweep in the first round. The Jets played well, for sure, but I mean, was it false hope that they generated? I don't think so, but they certainly never got back to that level. And now the question is, how do you get to that level, Huss?
Yeah, well, listen, getting to that level, and we've seen the Jets play at a very high level, a level far higher than we saw in this series. And Ken, you mentioned about the just the puck management and the efficiency of just making the simple right decisions. I'll give Montreal a lot of credit. I think the way that they played certainly made it a lot more difficult for the Winnipeg Jets to do that. But my God, I mean, at times the reason why this was so lopsided and, the Jets, even in close games, never really seemed to be in it was exactly what you said, starting in their own end. They're lucky if they still have control of the puck by the time it gets to the red line. And as far as getting it in the blue line, I mean, the odd time that they didn't dump it in, it was often checked. And if they did dump it in, Carey Price was one touching it the other way, and often the Habs were going to the races. So, I mean, it was stunning to see how something that went very, very well, I think better than a lot of people thought went in round number 1, completely cratered on them. And, despite the fact that was sort of happening through game 1 and especially game 2, there was absolutely no response from the Winnipeg Jets. And that's why we're sitting here talking about a garbage bag day coming up in the next 48 hours right now.
Ken, do you really think Ville Heinola would have made that much of a difference? Huss and I were talking before you got on.
Oh, I'm not saying he would have made a massive difference, but we could have helped make the exits cleaner. Again, I'm not looking past the warts. I know he's a young player, and I'm not saying he should have been in the game from game 1. He needed time in the American Hockey League. He spent that time there. The big thing for me, guys, and this is always very difficult for any coaching staff, I totally understand, you are always playing for the now. The biggest thing for me, in the last 2 years, the Jets played a number of players on expiring contracts. Yes, that is part of the deal. But if you are not able to go on a lengthy run, and if the defense is a deficiency, there is one element of on-the-job training. The NHL is not a place for on-the-job training, but in order for Heinola to be more ready to be a contributor next season, he needed to play more than 5 NHL games this year. Now, we know the ELC is probably the overriding factor of all of that. But for the Jets to get to the next level, they need to upgrade their back end. That is important. It's a massive importance for them. And if you're not going to use the draft capital or prospect capital, then you need to find a way to get those guys to play. Sometimes, it's natural for some experienced players to be given, the early nod. But if those players are relatively equal, again, Dylan Sandberg will benefit greatly from the top 4 minutes that he had with the Manitoba Moose. He's ready to play. I think that Heinola will be ready to play. But you need stability. What's going to happen now with, Huss, we've had this discussion, this debate. We'll get into expansion at some point. Logan Stanley, great tonight, but for all the people that said you can get rid of Dylan DeMello, does this series not reinforce the need for Dylan DeMello to be a Winnipeg Jet next year? It completely changed the arc of how Josh Morrissey's entire playoffs went. So to me, they have to either find a way to protect both or make a side deal, because I don't think you can just hope that Seattle takes Mason Appleton and you maybe are able to replace him with Christian Vesalainen or Jansen Harkins, because I think the Jets defense corps needs both Logan Stanley and Dylan DeMello in it next year.
I just wonder about doing that move, because I think
I know.
We thought back to what they did with Vegas and trying to hold it and keep their defense core in place, and we saw in this series where that got them. I mean, it's Nick Suzuki who goes in the Jets draft pick spot, and how nicely would he have looked, and how nice did he show up in the playoffs? I mean, you're talking about the Jets' inability to get to the net, and here's a smaller sized player with the Montreal Canadiens who got to the net front all series long, a young guy, sophomore player, absolutely phenomenal. You got to give credit where that is. I mean, we go back to, and Kenny, we'll dive into that debate, but it's interesting when you talk about the defense. I'm not hearing you say this, but this is what I think, and I wonder. We talked about the Winnipeg Jets, and Ken, both you and I had them making the Stanley Cup playoffs. Huss, did you have the Jets making the playoffs at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I had them like right on the borderline, but I figured they'd get in, in and around,
I said the exact same thing. That's exactly what I said as well. I think I probably said 4 specifically. I think in the Winnipeg market, the vast majority of Winnipeg journalists did pick the Jets to make the playoffs. Outside the market, I think that everyone was looking and they thought their defense core was weak. We're here and we're having this conversation. We're talking about their inability to move the puck. We're talking about Dylan DeMello going out of the lineup and that being just with that one linchpin gone, this defense being fairly ineffective against this team. Was Maurice hamstrung this entire season by that defense core that he had? And I wonder if the answer to that question is yes. Did Maurice hide a lot of what this team's problems were, make them look like they had more of a potential to be successful than they had, and it was always going to end this way?
I don't know if it was Maurice that masked as much as Connor Hellebuyck. I mean, to be perfectly honest, if you have a goaltender go out and have an average or subpar season, we're not talking about the playoffs. I don't think. I mean, and that was even with the Jets record. Let's not forget this team was at one point before, a pretty tough slide at the end. They were 27-14 at one time, 13 games above 500. Yeah. So, I mean, they were doing a lot of good things, much better at that point than they did in the final week of the season or month of the season. But let's be real here. I mean, I guess Paul Maurice probably did some things to get by as much as they could and get wins. But listen, if you want to talk about a reason why that happened, number 37, Connor Hellebuyck, is clearly far and away the number one reason on my list.
Ken?
Yeah, and I mean, a big thing here, I mean, I saw in the chat room, I mean, Joel Edmondson, the Canadiens made a trade to get him, so Edmondson never got to UFA status. We all agree we had Joel Edmondson on the wish list for the Jets had he not been traded to Montreal before free agency opened. I mean, and everything that the Jets are missing. I mean, yes, Derek Forward is a big-bodied player. He's not an overly physical player. Joel Edmondson has a mean streak in him that not a lot of players in the NHL have anymore. Some people don't like that, but a lot of people do like that style of game, and he's involved. He has been a winner. To me, a couple things. Devon Toews. I mean, so he goes for 2 seconds. I mean, how good would Devon Toews look on the second pairing with Neil Pionk? No, he doesn't solve the size problem, but man, mobile puck mover again. But maybe they just weren't willing to make that move. But there are a couple other things that.
Well, he just on that, Ken, just quickly on that, because I do agree with you. I mean, if you were thinking this team has, a real, hey, they've got the goaltender and you got the guys up front, the blue line is lacking. I think there's something to be said for, leaving it until the last minute at the deadline to get something done. Listen, if that was the priority that you felt it was, I think, in retrospect, being aggressive before the final day of the deadline. And listen, I don't know what the market was like. I don't know whether, the Jets were getting squeezed and, it was unreasonable offers. But at a certain point, if that is something that you figured that you needed to make happen, I mean, you need to do that. And well, listen, end up better than getting Jordy Ben at 1:59 a minute or 30 seconds before the trade deadline. And listen, I know they were working hard. rumored to be Jamie Alexiak, some other players. We talked about Ekholm. But listen, at the end, if we're looking back and saying, you know what, a deal needed to be made, I think we knew that a deal needed to be made far earlier than the trade deadline, and maybe that was a missed opportunity. But the other side of it is, and you have to look at this, what are you paying for and what are you going to get out of it? If they thought that, listen, having some of these younger guys get the experience in the playoffs, they knew they were going to be a playoff team, they'd essentially already made it. It wasn't like they were making a push to get in. Maybe we'll look back and say it was a smart move not to play Ville Heinola. Like an extra year, the contract will be important going forward. I mean, I'm here to listen to those arguments. But if you're talking about that they didn't get the help on defense, it wasn't like it was a guy got hurt 2 days before the trade deadline. You knew that this need was there. And obviously nothing really got done except a very minor deal that I don't think really improved the team at the last minute.
Yeah, even someone like Mike Riley, quickly, guys. I mean, that was one of the guys. I mean, Patrick Nemeth. I mean, these are guys that I mentioned in my list going into the deadline. I mean, Mike Riley, I think the biggest whiff of my prediction list on this program, Sean, was saying that Mike Riley would have a bigger impact in Boston than Taylor Hall, but he could have still helped the Jets' third pairing. I mean, right? I mean, that's the other part. And he's a guy that has played some top 4 minutes before. I think he would have been a safe addition at a relatively low price. But again, the problem is we're never going to hear the story about what the Jets were really close on and what maybe was turned down. But sure, this is not just a this year problem. It's a 2-year window problem. So, I mean, I think that has to be a priority. And as I mentioned, I think the Jets defense core is going to improve. But is Paul Maurice willing to play Logan Stanley, Dylan Samberg, and Ville Heinola as half of his 6 defensemen? That is the big question mark to me. And if the answer is not yes, they need to move one of those players to upgrade the defense core.
Well, Ken, we're going to get into that. I've already told the audience here that we'll really dig into, what to do going forward. And,
sure.
An entire season kind of post-mortem after garbage bag day. We'll have a bunch of people on and we'll dig into that kind of stuff. I just wanted to make this point. I mean, I hear what you're saying and I hear what you're talking about, Ville Heinola coming in and the kind of the puck moving and all that kind of stuff. I think there was only one way to break what the Montreal Canadiens were doing, because by the end of that game, you saw it. The Jets couldn't even get past their own blue line. They were passing the puck up. The D-men were passing it up. It was getting turned over and coming straight back the other way. I think the only thing that was going to get you out of that was one or a couple of big puck-moving defensemen. And I don't mean puck-moving as in passing. I mean the kind of guys that if you're going to sit back and wait for a team to try and pass its way out of trouble, the kind of guys who just skated out. And I go back to, not that he's that big, but Chris Letang did that like an absolute stud in one of those years, the year he wasn't injured, in that back-to-back years that the Pittsburgh Penguins won. Teams would sit back on them, and he would just constantly take the ice that was given to him and take it out of there, take that ice and force someone to make a move on him and pass it to where that guy had just vacated his zone. I don't remember seeing that once in this series. I don't remember seeing Jets D-men getting a hold of the puck and skating it out of trouble. I don't know that, and I don't think Ville Heinola is that guy. I go back to the idea of this. It's clearly an imperfect roster to me. I don't think that there was, and I go back to saying this, I think this is how it was going to end. It didn't matter if it ended against the Montreal Canadiens or if it ended in the next round. Whenever it ended, it was going to end with that defense core being exposed. And I just think that we've talked about this 2 years now. The defense core has been in a place where from the outside, media members, fans, other teams can look at it and say, this is the weakness of the Winnipeg Jets. Connor Hellebuyck masked it last season. We were talking in that first round about, figuring out a way for that defense to look really good and how they turned everything around. But clearly, this just wasn't a defense that was going to last under pressure. I thought they were entirely exposed in this series. You have something to say, Ken, before we move on?
Heinola is that kind of guy that can be a Chris Letang kind of player. He's not going to be Heiskanen. No, I mean, not today, but I think by next season he's going to be Miro Heiskanen light. I mean, and I say that by watching him in the playoffs. I love Heiskanen's game. Ville Heinola is not as quick as him. He's not as big as him, but he has the capability to have that kind of impact in terms of helping get the puck out of the zone. Not a one-man exit like Shea Theodore, but similar, someone who can get moving. And I think he's shown a diligence to get better defensively during the course of the year. And that's something that it's a humongous summer for Ville Heinola. And this, I don't mean asking him to gain 20 pounds, but I mean, his fitness has to be at an elite level. He can be an impact player as early as next season. I'm not saying he would have been an impact player in this series, but I think he could have helped the third pairing. That's what I'm saying.
His fitness must be great. Wasn't he getting bag skated for a month while he wasn't playing hockey games?
No, for sure. And here's one big thing. And I know some folks, this is not a Sami Niku situation. We're at practice every day. We see the work Ville Heinola is putting in, and yes, of course, it would be frustrating for Niku or Heinola. But this is a guy who still played 40-plus games, nearly 50 games this year. So I get it, fans are upset, one every couple months, yeah. But this guy still played. His development path was helped in a year where a lot of people didn't play at all. Same with Cole Perfetti, 40-some games, I think, almost 50 games played, in a year where his league didn't play. So this is not a lost year for Ville Heinola. But he's got to have a massive summer of training. He's got to do everything in his power to force his way into potentially being in the top 4 next year. And part of his time with the Moose is going to help him do that. But I'm very fascinated to see where he's at come training camp. And he could be a big piece of the Jets moving forward as early as next year. Again, I'm not talking about 40, 50 points, running the first PP and everything else. Eventually, I think he can have that kind of a role. It's not going to be this fall, but he's a guy that can upgrade the Jets' defense immediately, in my opinion.
Let me just, before I know, Sean, we got to move on, but just on the defense, I mean, we're talking about, Jordy Ben and Derek Forbort. I mean, these are replacement level players in the National Hockey League. You had a couple young guys, but, you had Neil Pionk, who I thought was every bit of what people expected and more. And then you have Josh Morrissey. And listen, I know we've said Josh Morrissey played the best of the year when he was with Dylan DeMello, and that's true. But, I mean, what do we learn about Josh Morrissey of this season? Because, I mean, there were a lot of ups and downs. And I think, the organization certainly thought that they had a reliable top pairing guy that they were signing for long term. And I understand that there were some real challenges, but I don't know. It's hard. We focus a lot on the third pairing, but let's face it, there were some real rough times for 44 this year. And I guess it's nice to think, well, Dylan DeMello will come back and, everything will be fine. But I don't know. I've got some real questions about, how much you can expect out of Josh Morrissey and how big of a role he can play on a team if you're expecting to win a Stanley Cup.
Ken, let me take that one first. I'm going to say this. You talked about them locking up a guy long-term and thinking they had a top guy. The contract says everything itself. He's a secondary defenseman. Josh Morrissey is your great number 2 defenseman. He's the guy you want playing with this stud defenseman that I was referring to before. And I think that's one of the issues that we have when we start having these conversations with these different players and different defensemen. And Ken, I know you talked about it. Ron McLean gave you a shout-out before the game about this, the idea of moving Pionk up with Morrissey. I mean, when you're taking those 2 guys and putting them up onto your top pairing and saying, okay, these are our best 2 defensemen, let's see what these guys can do. No criticism of those 2 guys, but that's like a number 2 and a number 3 guy being asked to do the role of a number 1 and a 2 guy. And it reminds me of the Jets when they first came to town. They were, Blake Wheeler hadn't stepped into what he was eventually going to become. And the Jets were a team that had basically, a second line and 2 third lines, or maybe 2 fourth lines and a third line, right? And the problem, as we all know, when you play hockey is if guys aren't in the right spot, they get exposed, right? And so I take a look at Josh Morrissey, and I think Josh Morrissey, the same as I think this team is a victim of not having a proper defense core. Josh Morrissey is a victim this season, clearly, and probably since Dustin Byfuglien has been out. He's a victim of a guy who's being asked to do a job that he probably just isn't capable of. That's no knock against him. people are what they are. They've got their ceilings. I don't think he's a 1A defenseman. And that's, to me, the biggest issue I see with Josh Morrissey this year is that he's carrying along Tucker Poolman the entire season, probably a third pairing guy playing on a first pair. So not only are you not a number one defenseman, but you're not a number one defenseman carrying along a third pairing guy. That's a tough spot to put him in. And I go back to this. This is the general manager that has put these guys in this situation. I think Paul Maurice went, and a perfect example is Forbert down the stretch, how rough he looked. And Paul Maurice had said, we're going to put Neil Pionk back with him, and it's going to fix a lot of those problems. I think that it was a tenuous game of Jenga that Paul Maurice was playing with that defense core to make them stand up. And as soon as Dylan DeMello got pulled out, that tower fell. It was tenuous at best for the rest of the season. That's my take on Morrissey. Ken, what do you got?
Yeah, two quick things. One of the biggest problems for the Jets, which pairing was on the ice when Lehkonen scored? Tucker Poolman and Derek Forbert. So basically, when they give up the goal in the last minute, Paul almost completely went away from them because they got scored on, right? I mean, this was all about what it leaves the Jets. And I totally understood that there was a risk involved in that. But, I mean, we know that Tucker Poolman is best served on the third pairing. But here's the other part. Is Tucker Poolman even going to be back with the Jets? So this is the thing that didn't make sense to me all year long. I understood DeMello as a safety valve for Logan Stanley, but it weakened both pairings. That's the thing I don't understand. I mean, I understand the reasoning behind it and the premise, but the Jets hurt their top pairing in order to try to prop up their third pairing. And to me, that doesn't make sense. In terms of Morrissey, I'm not concerned about Josh at all. I understand that this was a hard year for him. He wore his emotions in almost every Zoom call that we saw during the stretch. I think that Josh will benefit from going home and having a chance to reset. I think it was incredibly frustrating for him to have a revolve. He would never say it publicly, and he probably wouldn't say it privately either. But when you read the body language, here's a guy who is frustrated by the revolving door of partners. And of course, when you're paid as a number one defenseman, you're expected to help carry your partner to a degree. But Josh is a very capable number two guy. Everyone who says he can't run the power play, I mean, the guy put up lots of points in junior. He's got a decent shot. Like, look at the shot. Today, perfect shot goes off the stick of Carey Price. I mean, that's the kind of series it was for him. Do the Jets need a number 1D? Of course, but guess what? These guys are not readily available, and the one that they had left before his contract was up, right? I mean, the equation for the Jets changed when Dustin Byfuglien lost his desire to play hockey. I know that's 2 years ago now, but this reinforces how hard it is to find a number one defenseman. And this also reminds me of something that one of my favorite discussions from whatever it was 5 years ago. Remember the narrative when PK Subban was traded for Shea Weber? Mm-hmm. What is Shea Weber doing for the Montreal Canadiens right now? Oh, playing 25, 26, 27 minutes a game. Still as a top pairing guy. Those guys are hard to find. And you're right, it's the job of the GM to find one. But the Jets had one who departed, and they had another one that they thought they had drafted who departed also in Jacob Trouba. Josh Morrissey is a very capable top pairing guy. He's best suited in a complementary role. I agree with that completely. But how are the Jets going to get one short of trading Mark Scheifele? How are you going to get a number one stud D-man? You got to find one internally, right? And that's what I'm saying. You need to hope that Ville Heinola grows into it. He's not going to be it this fall, but you have to hope that he grows into that. Some people talk about Seth Jones. Seth Jones I don't see as a possibility. The Jets cannot afford to trade for someone going into his UFA season. Yeah, they need to find somebody with term. And Vince Dunn, if he's available, he's not a number one defenseman. He'd be a very good second pairing guy, but that's not going to be what happens in that scenario. But I expect no one is harder on Josh Morrissey than Josh Morrissey. I expect him to come back and play a very solid season, and I know some people don't agree with that. There's no chance the Jets are exposing him to expansion, nor should they. A team that does not have enough top pairing defensemen should not should not expose one of his top pairing defensemen for free. Sorry, that is not happening. That is a full-on wake up right there.
We need We
And
need
if
a
Ryan
graphic
Ellis
that
is
we can drop
available-
in. Wake up when you do that, Ken. I love that stuff. Yeah.
And Ryan Ellis is a good defenseman. He's also not
He's
a
not
true
a
number one.
guy,
Roman
yeah.
Josi is a number one defenseman. Matthias
Yeah.
Ekholm and Ryan Ellis, those are 2A and 2B.
Right.
Ryan Ellis is like Neil Pionk with maybe a harder shot.
Yeah. Hey, we can dig into how,
Okay.
the possibility of how you could potentially get a number one defenseman. We're going to do it going forward on our show where we dissect the season. We got to get into Dubois. Okay. And I take no pleasure in this. I said I could see it happening. We talked about this a long time ago, Ken.
Yep.
Pierre-Luc Dubois ends up where I had said I thought that he was starting to filter into, and again, I've said this in the past, Pierre-Luc Dubois, I don't think this is his year. I think they can work on him and get him going forward. But I'd said time and time again, all year as they were putting him on center and putting Paul Stastny on the wing, I thought it was a mistake. I thought Paul Stastny had been the better centerman the entire year. I thought Lowry had been the better one of the centermen. I know they were trying to find a place. They were trying to get him going. It never worked. But for him to kind of fall down the lineup that he did, and ended up on the third line, fourth line for a little bit as part of that game. I thought it was necessary for them to do to get him out of the way. Huss, your thoughts on what has to be seen as just an absolutely disastrous playoffs for Pierre-Luc Dubois?
Well, I mean, Sean, we had talked. I mean, I thought that there was a lot of patience for Pierre-Luc Dubois from the organization, from the fan base throughout the year. We know the circumstances of the trade. He came in, he was quarantined, a new team, took a while to really kind of fit in and never really found that spot, which, was unfortunate, but the team got through it. And there was always this hope, this expectation, really. I mean, the reason why how many times did we hear it? The reason why the Jets traded for Pierre-Luc Dubois, think about what he did in the playoffs, his impact before in some big series wins for the Columbus Blue Jackets at a very young age. That was the expectation for Pierre-Luc Dubois. And I think people were fine to let a plenty of time go by to see where it went. But the second that Mark Scheifele got himself suspended from this series, the spotlight went directly on number 13. All right, this is the chance. All of the frustrations of the rest of the season would have been forgotten if he was able to step up and help the team. And not only did he not do that, guys, I mean, he lost his spot in the top six. He did shifts with Nate Thompson and Trevor Lewis at times today. Sean, there's no other way to describe this as a disaster. Now, I know Jeff Hamilton said, we may find out that, he's been playing with an injury or something. I mean, I hate to say it, but that would almost be good news, I think, to fans, because it's hard not to be incredibly concerned. And then when you think of the fact that Patrick Laine was traded to get Pierre-Luc Dubois, it obviously is going to raise the stakes and the pressure on a player like that in that role. So, I mean, coming out of this, the Dubois situation, his future, what sort of player will we see next season is absolutely one of the big stories on this. And unfortunately for Kevin Cheveldayoff, I mean, that is, a franchise-changing move. There'll be plenty more time for Pierre-Luc Dubois to show his worth to the Winnipeg Jets. But I can tell you, if the Pierre-Luc Dubois of this season is the player going forward for the Winnipeg Jets, that's going to be a trade that it will live in infamy and will also really hold this team back for the next couple of years, because the asset of Patrick Laine coming from Pierre-Luc Dubois, there's some good reasons and thinking behind the deal. But if that is the Pierre-Luc Dubois that the Winnipeg Jets have, it's simply not going to be good enough, and will really hamper the team going forward.
Yeah, one quick thing, too, for that comment about 24 games without a goal to end the season. That's a bad stretch of hockey, probably one of the worst for Dubois. He's obviously hurt. I mean, even if he's not injured, this is a guy that two games into his tenure with the Jets after a 14-day quarantine had a lower body injury. Anyone who watched him last year and the year before, he's not skating with the same power that he did against the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Tampa Bay Lightning. This is not just a guy who had one great series. He had 10 points in 10 games last year, including 5 games against the Tampa Bay Lightning. The year before, when the Columbus Blue Jackets knocked out Tampa, he was an impact player there as well. I'm not making excuses for him. Pierre-Luc Dubois needs to be a lot better. He knows it. I know it. You all know it. I expect him to be better. Nobody needs a reset more than Pierre-Luc Dubois. And if he is not at a higher level than this, you're right, Huss. I mean, some people, to all of us, sent notes. I can't imagine. I'm scared this is going to be a Chad Kilger situation. I can probably recall answering a lot of those text messages, DMs, emails. I don't think we are headed that way, but it's up to Pierre-Luc Dubois to find a new level. If I'm Pierre-Luc Dubois, I do not think about a contract extension this summer. All I think about is getting right physically and mentally to have a dominant season. And I'm not saying he has to come out and be an 80-point player, but he needs to be an impact player. I expect him to be much better next year, and it's not just because it's a contract year. It's been very evident this is a person who's accountable. He's not out here saying, I'm playing great hockey. The only thing that I think that was kind of, I mentioned this the other day, when Pierre-Luc Dubois told us he was still a confident player on Saturday morning, that was more to try to convince himself than to convince us, because he's not playing like a confident player. He mishandled pucks, all of the things that he did well when he got here, winning board battles, pushing people aside. We didn't see any of that as the playoffs went on. He had a good scoring chance the other day. He panicked and shot right away and got nothing on it, right? I mean, that's the thing that stands out for me. This isn't about one shift in Columbus or anything else. This is about two players that were supposed to be getting a fresh start where the grass was greener, who completely lost track of what they are good at. And I don't expect for 1 second that Patrik Laine is not going to find a way to find his game. And I also don't think for 1 second that Pierre-Luc Dubois is suddenly going to be a 0.3 points per game player. I just don't see it happening. I think both players will go home, get away from the game. We know Laine has gotten away from the game. Otherwise, he would have been at the World Championships, probably knocking that gold medal out of Canada's hands. I think both these guys are going to have a much better season next year. I just don't have any doubt about it. We know Patrik Laine from being around him much more than we do Pierre-Luc Dubois, but I didn't see a sign of someone who's an arrogant person or someone who's not willing to put the work. And I think that nobody's more disappointed. We know people are disappointed in Dubois. They show up every game to tell us that. Nobody's more disappointed than Dubois about how things went for him. And I know somebody suggested this is like Kevin Hayes. It's not like Kevin Hayes at all, because there was zero chance that Kevin Hayes was coming back. We know that Dubois is going to be back. You're not trading Pierre-Luc Dubois for a defenseman. You don't trade a distressed asset to try to solve your problem, because you're not getting a number one defenseman for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Pierre-Luc Dubois can still be the solution. This year, that didn't transpire. Let's see what next year brings. And I'm not taking him off the hook. He didn't play well enough. There's nobody questioning that whatsoever. But to say that a 22-year-old is finished and he will never amount to anything is simply not a very smart play. I will be checking your receipts. You're not saying that, but a lot of people are.
Yeah, no, but by the same token, I mean, with that trade made earlier, like if you would have told me that we'd be sitting here at the end of the playoffs talking about how he finished up on the fourth line, referring to him as a distressed asset, I mean, that is about as bad as it could have possibly gone. I think when we're talking about this, with what was come in and the excitement of what he was supposed to bring to the Winnipeg Jets. I'm fully with you. I mean, I think next year will be an absolutely huge prove-it year. And as much as he might not be thinking contract right now or extension, I don't think the Jets are feeling very comfortable about that either. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And, certainly to the team, the organization, and to the fans that have sort of been a little disgruntled by seeing what's happened. It's going to be, to your point, Ken, an absolutely massive year for Pierre-Luc Dubois. And the Winnipeg Jets need him to have a massive bounce back.
Okay, devil's advocate time. Pierre-Luc Dubois comes into Winnipeg, and he comes to the perfect coach to gloss over what he just went through. Pierre-Luc Dubois, players' reputations have been ruined by doing something like the shift that he took in Columbus before he came here. There's no acceptable explanation for what he did in Columbus. That's an immature player who's doing the wrong thing. You want out of town, give Patrick Laine credit. Patrick Laine never quit on the Winnipeg Jets when he wanted out of town. Pierre-Luc Dubois quit on his team when he did that. He came here, it was glossed over. The line was, hey, let's not judge it. He's had 10,000 shifts in the NHL. Let's not judge him on this one. I think that's a load of BS. I thought it at the time. I think that until this day. Players should not be doing that. He did that. He got run out of town. John Tortorella was asked about his path with Pierre-Luc Dubois, and it was a path time and time again where he needed to use, the hammer of benching him, sitting him down time and time again to shape him and get him to realize the things that he needed to do. Now, yes, Ken, we saw what he was capable of doing in the playoffs in the past. We've also seen his history suggest to us a player that had a lot of episodes like he had this season, a lot of no-shows. This isn't the first time in his career. He didn't come to Winnipeg and suddenly people started asking questions of where did this guy go. This has been a theme in his career in the past. And here's what bugs me more than anything of what Pierre-Luc Dubois did in these playoffs was that penalty that he took with less than 10 minutes left to go in Game 3, down 3-1. If there's a team, or down 4-1, whichever it was, if there was a team in the Stanley Cup playoffs who should have had faith and hope that they could erase a 4-1 deficit, come back, win a game, and change a series, it was the Winnipeg Jets. And at that moment, Pierre-Luc Dubois chose to take an extremely selfish penalty in that moment to basically take at the very least 2 minutes off the clock and take away a lot of hope against a team that was giving them absolutely none. Why are we not talking about that? Why are we not talking about the mindset of a player that did not show up when his team needed him to, who showed up in town after quitting on his team before that? Pierre-Luc Dubois is a nice guy. We all like him. We like talking to him. But to me, the biggest issue that they face with this player is trying to figure out his mindset and what motivates him. And that was the biggest issue that John Tortorella had when he was in Columbus.
Go ahead, Huss. I mean, I don't have much else to add on Dubois.
Listen, it's a bad look. Listen, he got traded here. I mean, dwelling on the way things ended in Columbus, I don't think was what anyone wanted to do when he came here. But I'll tell you what, and listen, I'm not saying for a second, I don't think you are, that, he quit it all in the playoffs or anything like that, but he didn't get it done, didn't show enough. And, it's funny, I've got this long list of things that the Habs were better than the Winnipeg Jets are. I forgot composure, Sean, so thank you. There's another one of this long list of ways the Habs dominated the Winnipeg Jets. Composure in Game 3, not good. And I mean, it was uncharacteristic, because we can say what we want about Pierre-Luc Dubois, young, immature, whatever. Paul Stastny did the same thing. And I mean, honestly, if you want to talk about, a guy that you would expect not to do that, maybe more than anyone in the club, it's Paul Stastny. So, it's an example of a problem that the team suffered. But certainly, I mean, you got a bit of a target on your back when you're sliding down the roster, when so much is expected of you, and you do something like that, Sean. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the expectations for Dubois going into next season, not from the fans, from the hockey club, from the organization, are going to be significant. And I mean, if they don't get the guy that they thought they were trading for, you wonder what the future, what the path will be for both the team and the player. Because as we all agree, if the Winnipeg Jets are going to take a step forward, they need much more from number 13.
Yeah, and one big thing here, quickly, sorry. We don't pretend to know Pierre-Luc Dubois. We've never spoken to him in person. So what my research from speaking to two of his junior coaches tell me is that he has that competitive fire, that he displayed it on numerous occasions. His one coach called him the Terminator. So I don't think for a second this is a guy who goes through life as a floater and doesn't care about what's happening. It didn't work out for him. Sean, we know this extremely well. Patrick Laine didn't look like himself in Columbus either, right? There's one constant between both those two guys, and we both like Tortorella, but Patrick Laine didn't look like himself either. So, and we both don't think that he's just going to go off into the ether and not be an impact player either. So,
well, you could say the same thing about Winnipeg then, right?
Right.
Because, I mean, why did Laine go? I mean, he wasn't himself. Whatever, he's gone forward. So
both organizations thought they were solving a problem.
Yeah. And Torts is gone, by the way.
Right, and both of the players still had a problem. And we both think they're both good players. So, I'm not saying this is an apples to oranges situation here. What I am saying is I would be leery of thinking that this is all we're going to see and that Pierre-Luc Dubois 22 is a finished product. And I know you're not saying this, but I think there's more for him.
He can't be, yeah.
There's more for him to give. And
I've said in the past, I think he could, and people are saying it here, and I agree with this 100%. I think the Winnipeg Jets need an off season to have their player development staff deal with him, talk with him, massage him, get him to figure out what it means to be a Winnipeg Jet, how they approach things, get him into your systems. I agree with you 100%. I agree with you that there's a potentially bright future for this player, and that time with him is going to benefit him with the team next year. I'm just saying this player has been given a pass in this regard, and we're acting like there's like there were no signs behind this. We're acting like this is a player that we were walking in and expecting.
Is he getting a pass?
To take over. I think he's not getting a pass for not playing. He's getting a pass for exactly what John Tortorella talked about this player, that this is a player that he felt needed motivation at times. Does that not look exactly like what we saw from Pierre-Luc Dubois down the stretch of the season and potentially here? Yes, he's showed up in the playoffs in the past. I'm not saying he's not capable of showing up. I'm saying what Pierre-Luc Dubois talked about. He did a great interview with Christine Simpson, who was on Kenny and Renny, by the way. We asked her about this. He did a great interview with Christine Simpson where he explained himself with Pierre-Luc Dubois and said, this is a head coach and a player, and it's part of getting him to where we needed him to be. But that was what we saw here, to me, is clearly an extension of what John Tortorella was dealing with in Columbus. And Pierre-Luc Dubois got sick of John Tortorella dealing with that with him and wanted out and got into this situation. And I think the Jets are finding out everything that John Tortorella was dealing with. And we don't talk about that. And to your point, Ken, about the difference between Patrick Laine going there, we all know what Patrick Laine is capable of. I think if all of us here are being honest, we take a look at a player that was entirely mismanaged by a roster that had no one for him to play with. And we do know that Patrick Laine can go to sleep if things aren't going well. We've seen it in the past. But Pierre-Luc Dubois was given every single possible opportunity to click with anyone on this lineup, an opportunity that Patrick Laine never got in this town. They never crafted the lineup around Patrick Laine to get him going or make him as effective as they possibly could. Pierre-Luc Dubois was given that. He was given every single opportunity. I don't take a look at Patrick Laine's situation, Pierre-Luc Dubois' situation, and see it as the same thing at all. I think Patrick Laine was sent to a place where it was going to be terrible regardless. Pierre-Luc Dubois had every single opportunity to turn things around. When we're trying to explain why he could not do it, I'm saying we can't discount what John Tortorella was dealing with that entire time and what ended up having him quit his way out of town in Columbus. That's all I'm saying.
I get it, but Laine had the exact same problems in Columbus. So, I mean,
those aren't the exact same problems. I don't see those as being the exact same problems. And the problems that we're talking about, I don't think are a history of what we're dealing with Patrick Laine. Patrick Laine in Winnipeg showed to be a player who showed up at really important times and showed that he was capable of making the best of the situation that he was in, despite the fact he was clearly unhappy with the situation. Patrick Laine gave you everything you could have asked for from a player that was not happy in his situation and wanted out of town. He never went to sleep. He put up points by the boatload. He put up goals like crazy. He gave you everything.
Scored 2 in his last game as a Jet.
Exactly. This to me, this isn't the same situation at all. I look at, and I think honestly, Kenny, I don't know how you couldn't look at him going to Columbus and thinking that team mismanaged the hell out of a player that didn't have a roster that could have benefited him in the first place. I don't know how you could look at it any other way, being a Jets fan or person who covers the Jets and saw what he was capable of over his years here.
I mean, I'm just saying that John Tortorella wanted nothing more than Patrick Laine to be a first-line player, and that's not where he finished up. He didn't produce like one either. That's why I'm saying there's parallels. Both players had long stretches of inconsistency, but they're both excellent hockey players at their core. I mean, Patrick Laine did a lot for the Winnipeg Jets. No one's disputing that. But he also had a stretch where he had 16 goals in a month and had 30 on the season. So Patrick also had long stretches of, and no, he wasn't playing on the top line the whole time. We know that. He was mostly a second line player here, but he got first power play minutes. I just think that both of these players are young players who will still flourish in their current situations when they come back with the fresh start of this year. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying, you're right. The biggest difference is the Jets did everything that they could to make Dubois at times a first line player, and it didn't work out for him, right?
Which is ironic. Which
right.
is
I think
funny
the point Sean's trying to make is that
yeah.
if the Jets had spent all that time trying to give Patrick Laine those first line minutes, maybe they don't even get to this problem.
I think I very craftily made that.
No, you did, Sean. And I'll tell you what. And you know what was? It's very interesting because of what happened with Laine and the fact that it was Laine and Roslovic that were traded for Pierre.
Is this our first fight? Sorry, hang on, Huss. Is this our first fight here?
Are we in a fight? Now that I look in the mirror, my face is a little red. I don't know. I think I'm just getting tired. My cheeks and stuff when I get tired. This isn't a fight. This isn't
good.
Yeah.
Good.
Anyways,
but listen, Dubois was treated differently than any other younger player for a long time in Winnipeg. I mean, I can't remember a young player that got more rope than Pierre-Luc Dubois, trying literally everything for him, and that includes Patrick Laine, and that certainly includes Nikolai Ehlers. I mean, Sean, you're right when it comes to they did everything they could, moving around to the point where the last resort, the last move that they tried was, you know what, we're not doing this anymore, and putting him on the fourth line right now. And I think the big reason why was the expectations, how much they needed him, and the price that was paid to get him put him in a different situation. And, we've run through this year. You wonder how Maurice handles things next year. I mean, is Pierre-Luc Dubois still the guy they traded for Patrick Laine? Or is Pierre-Luc Dubois, after this season, a young player that's got to prove that, he's worthy of a top 6 role with the Winnipeg Jets going forward? And I guess we'll see what's going on. Shout out RGB.
Yeah, he's going to be a second line center for the Jets. And if he's not, then there's a problem.
Yeah. This I thought was really interesting. Ask Paul Maurice about, because Ken, and you'll have picked up on this, the entire year when you talk to Paul Maurice about the Montreal Canadiens, he would almost, and it's not quite the right word, but it's close. He would almost speak about the Montreal Canadiens in these kind of vaunted terms, right? Like everything about the Montreal Canadiens was that they were, oh boy, those Montreal Canadiens, they're tough to play against. It seems to me all the times he talked about that, this version of the Montreal Canadiens was exactly what he was seeing. When I asked him about that, and I go back to him saying whichever of these two teams gets to their game first is going to win. They clearly got to their game. I felt in his answer, he said that the Montreal Canadiens, at their best, playing their game was a very extreme challenge for the Winnipeg Jets and caused them a lot of problems. To me, the way he answered that question felt like he was saying the Montreal Canadiens firing on all cylinders were a team that I'm not sure. Now, and he did say, I think we could have beat them, but it felt to me like he was saying that Montreal Canadiens team at their best as a team, I worried about them because I didn't think they were a team that we'd be able to beat unless we were absolutely firing on all cylinders. Did you get that from him when he answered that question?
Yeah, maybe not quite to that extent, but here's the one thing. I mean, what we know is that since Paul Maurice has been the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, the Montreal Canadiens have given the Jets fits, and that was before they changed their identity. They gave them fits when they were the little buzzing bees and the undersized forward group, because they would be piling up the 40 and 45 shot games and shooting from all elements. The Montreal Canadiens this year added veteran pieces, big-bodied players who are built for the Stanley Cup playoffs. Right now, the Jets don't have a roster that is completely built for the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I think that's what he meant. I don't think he thinks the Jets were undermatched or undermanned, but I think that he thought the Canadiens players did a better job of getting to their identity. I mean, and without Scheifele and DeMello, the Jets...
They did a better job of everything, Ken.
No, you're right, Huss. You touched on all the things. I mean, they scored 6 goals in 4 games. I mean, even with an all-world goaltender, like Connor Hellebuyck. The Jets are not, you're not winning a series with 6 goals in 4 games. That's just not enough. And 3 of those goals were scored by Derek Forbort and Logan Stanley, who had 2 today. 6 goals. 3 of them were scored by defensemen. The Jets had, 95% of their goals were scored by forwards. 3 of the 6 are scored by defensemen in the playoffs. That's not going to cut it. That means their big guns did not deliver, especially at 5-on-5, which is why I was frustrated, why I wrote this in my column going into today's game. Adam Lowry should have had more ice time today. I'm sorry. No one was going. Adam Lowry should have been playing more. He had his legs moving. He was physical. Mason Appleton got a nice promotion. I thought that Adam Lowry should have had a couple shifts with Nikolai Ehlers because Ehlers was unable to get anything going with Kopp and Wheeler. That was evident, right? I mean,
can I counter that? Don't stop because I know you've got more to say. I just want to counter that quickly because I was asked the same question. I think Paul Maurice's mindset on that is, listen, we're down 3-0 in this series. We're not going anywhere unless I can figure out how to get our scorers scoring.
Totally
to me,
fine. I think I would have put Wheeler with Kopp and Lowry as a line, and then you try Stastny with Connor and Ehlers because you needed to get Kyle Connor going, and Stastny's the distributor that maybe had a chance to get the puck in those guys' hands. Ehlers just didn't look comfortable on the left side with those guys. I don't think he touched the puck enough. I think he only when he had help, yes, it was going, but it was tough. It was tough for that group for sure. And again, I'm not saying that Adam Lowry should have played 25 minutes or that he was scored 5 goals, but I think he was one of the more effective players in the series, and they didn't have enough forwards going along with him.
Hey, Sean, just on that, you mentioned what Maurice said, and he was very complimentary to the Montreal Canadiens, as they deserve to be. Listening to Blake Wheeler talk today, this Montreal Canadiens team sounded like the '84 Oilers. And to be honest, they sort of looked that way at times against the Winnipeg Jets, but you will never hear, I don't know, I certainly hope there's more accountability inside the room, but I texted someone earlier today, I said, I swear to God, if we hear guys come out in front of the microphone and say again, well, we loved our game, we liked our game, which we heard in this series, I was going to absolutely lose it. Paul Stastny's speech to the media after the 6-1 was one of the few pieces of real honest truth we've got from the Winnipeg Jets at any point this season. And I think that's just the way they don't really feel that they owe it. Maybe they don't want to bring in any negativity. But the bottom line is these questions and the answers at times are almost patronizing, borderline insulting.
Totally.
So listen, that's what it was. I think Paul Maurice was being complimentary. He's never going to be a guy that will come out afterwards and said, you know what, that was embarrassing. We stunk. They just don't do that. So listen, I'm not sure what else he's going to say because they never eat their own in front of the microphones. As much as people would maybe want a little more accountability and honesty.
Fair point, Huss. But so I would counter by this. So do you think that Jared Bednar might regret what he said after Game 3 based on how his big guns responded in Game 4 against Vegas, where they were another no-show basically in the game?
He might, but I can tell you what, the response or the tack that the Jets have taken with this all year certainly did not really provide any fruit. So that you're interesting. Every coach needs to understand the way they motivate their players, and maybe the Jets are a team that can't take any public criticism at all, and we just say, hey, you know what? There were some things that we liked, and that's what we'll focus on. That's what this team does. I'm sorry. That's it.
No, and I'm not asking you to apologize, Hassan. Sean and I have had this conversation before. So the one quick thing on that front, and I'm not disputing that. I think that a little bit more truth serum, I think would help on a lot of fronts, whether it's players or coaches. But I think the one issue, and it's a critical issue for a guy who is the second longest tenured head coach in the National Hockey League. Calling out players is not part of Paul Maurice's DNA, and the minute he switches into being that person is when the players look at him as a fraud, and that's when for all of this discussion and debate and narrative about losing the room, if Paul Maurice turns into that person suddenly after 8 years, players are like, well, was the rest of it a lie or what's up? So that would be my only concern on that front in how it would be received. But I agree. I think there's a lot of times where, right. And how did that work out, Troy? That did not bring the desired response. So to me, I think it was a card that was worth playing, but it did not bring the desired result. I don't agree that it was embarrassing, Paul. I think that here's the other part. If you've been around Blake Wheeler for the last 10 years, Blake Wheeler is always going to look for a sliver of the positives. That's part of what he sees as his role as Jets captain. So, hey, again, would fans and even media at times want more truth serum? Sure, but don't look for something that's not there. That's one of the breadcrumbs. It's like when I said at the start of the year, when fans said, "Oh, Wheeler can't be hurt." He said, "Treat me as though I'm healthy if I'm on the ice." Well, being around Blake Wheeler for 10 seasons, as soon as you heard "treat me as though I'm healthy," you knew right away. I knew right away he wasn't healthy, because you have to watch the wording with Blake. I mean, that's the big thing. Sometimes you got to look, Huss, you know this. You got to look at the tea leaves, and you got to look between the lines. I mean, it's not always what is said. It's how it's said, and maybe what's not said is sometimes as important as what is said in those scenarios.
Yeah, there was probably a few things just from my perspective that maybe needed to be said at some point from the captain or one of these other players, and it never happened, and nothing ever changed, and they're making tea times tomorrow.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm glad you brought it up, Huss. Ken, I wanted to counter to you talking about Bednar. Bednar calls out that team all the time. What he did is nothing new. He does that all the time, and that team usually fires on all cylinders. I don't for a second equate what he said after Game 3 with the performance that they got in Game 4.
I'm not saying that either. I've just said some coaches use the
how that work out. You said how that work out.
Okay,
it didn't work out immediately.
Fair. Yeah. Well, all I'm saying is that fans think that sometimes calling out a player will immediately bring the desired result. My counter to that is that it isn't always the case. Sometimes when you try to bring out the cables to charge somebody up, you get a dead battery more than you get a charge from those players. That's all. I'm just saying that the cautionary tale is that. And again, I'm not saying that Colorado is done, but
nope.
A lot of people were crowning them after Game 2. BX had the great thing. Good thing we didn't just award him the cup after Game 2, because now there's a little bit of adversity on this train.
Are you looking at me when you say that, Ken?
No, I'm not. Not yet.
I did.
Sean, I'm only looking at you. The only time I'm looking at you about Colorado is when the series is over, and if my prediction is right and yours is wrong, and even then, there's not going to be an "I told you so" coming.
Yes, there will. Come on, you do it with your eyes. You don't say it with your mouth. You do it with your eyes. I want to touch on what Huss said. I couldn't agree with him more. You and I think, are a little bit on different sides of this. I've said in the past, I think there's a lot of coaches out there that call out their players in the media and do so in a manner that is, it's big boy stuff, right? Like we've talked about this before. Barry Trotz constantly calls out his players in the media, and he does it in a way where he's not calling them out. What he does is he's not afraid to talk about the struggles that his players have. He never has been. And I think Jared Bednar is the same thing. He's not afraid. And this is the thing that I'm so glad you brought this up, Huss. And I'm glad that you brought up the word patronizing, because I think this is how the Jets fans are left to feel quite often by the Winnipeg Jets in situations like this. There is no way you can sit there and tell me we liked our game and we did this and we did that. And I get it. And Ken, I know exactly what you're saying. I think this is attacked by Paul Maurice. Paul Maurice likes to focus on the positives, so he goes in those rooms and he highlights the positives and he minimizes the negatives, and that's how he goes, and his team are following in their footsteps. But a little bit of, to your point, truth serum. Like, in the end, your job is to go out and win hockey games. Yes. If you're the team that does it your way and says, F you to everyone else outside here, we're going to do it our way. If you're going to be the New England Patriots, then you better win like the New England Patriots. But if you're going to be a team that does not have the winning results, and you keep everything in-house and you refuse to communicate with your fans and be open about the experiences you are having and essentially tell them there's no problem here, as the fans can see the fire and smoke going up in the background, there's a problem with that. You owe it to your fans to be honest and openly communicative with them, unless you're in a situation where you are so good and you have such a good track record that you win all the time and you keep everything indoors, because guess what? If you do it that way, your fans will be just fine, because all they care about is you winning. But when you stop winning, but you keep telling fans that really we're winners, they see through that. I agree, it's patronizing. I don't like it. They need to find a better way to talk to their fans, because what we saw from them in this series, it's ridiculous. No one is buying that they liked their game and that things were good. Murat brought it up. There was no reason to think that this wasn't complete and utter domination from the Montreal Canadiens unless you were drinking up the Kool-Aid that the Jets were giving you.
Yeah, I've got all the time that the Montreal Canadiens played really well and stuff like that, but and as I said, listen, I mean, you're right. From a fan's perspective, it does seem somewhat patronizing and borderline insulting at times when you hear that. But again, it doesn't, I guess it matters for the way your fans think of the organization and the way they're being talked to. But really, it matters what you're saying to the players and what you get out of it. And, it just seems continually doing that. And at no point anyone really standing up and owning it just led to the same thing from game 2 to game 3 to game 4. And now where we're at right now. Sorry, Ken.
No, you're totally fine, Huss. It's all good. No, I've totally lost my train of thought now. Sorry.
Oh, he stumped you.
I almost had a microphone incident here. It'll be
okay. So it's
Ken
funny
on our show here.
Listen, meme dream team. I'm totally full marks. I mean, they were better than the Jets in. Maybe you're misunderstanding my point. They were better than the Jets in absolutely every aspect of the game and by a lot. But when you hear today listening to Blake Wheeler, it was all just about how good the Habs were. And at some point after a 4-game performance like that, you would like to hear a little bit of honesty about the fact that this team looked nothing like that team that swept the Oilers in the first round and simply weren't good enough and showed really not much pushback at any point in the series.
Yeah, one quick thing. Sorry, I have collected my thoughts here. I just think that having studied a little bit of watching a little bit of the sports psychology, and I understand it can be annoying and flabbergasting to some, but that if you don't have the belief in yourself, no one else is going to have it for you. And that's why I said I think that Pierre-Luc Dubois has to say he has confidence, because if he says I have no confidence, I mean, even Wheeler was out there saying we're at the other end of after game 3. Wheeler's out there saying I thought the Blake's presser after game 3 was great. He was out there admitting openly that the Habs are playing with all this confidence and we're at the other end of the pendulum. I mean, that was completely honest.
That was great. Exactly. That's exactly what the fans want to hear. Exactly. That's exactly what this team needs to do. Because it feels to me like they're lying to themselves, right? Like, how stark did it stand out to us during that 7-game losing streak? Is it
7
and
9 of 10?
It's growing in my head. How
muscle memory, Sean. Muscle memory.
How starkly did it stand out when? And Huss, you talked about this before. When Paul Stastny came out and told us what we all knew about the Winnipeg Jets and playing a game that they weren't playing right for a while, and it was finally catching up with them. It was like, Ken, we sat there up in the press box and we turned and looked at each other. It was like, oh my God, they're saying the truth that we all know. What is going on here? And I personally believe that Paul Stastny doing that, forced the Jets to own that. And then after he said that, Andrew Kopp came out and said it, and Blake Wheeler said it, and they all talked about it, that they hadn't been playing the right way and they'd got away from it. I thought in that moment it forced the Jets to take a look at themselves, and that was part of them turning their season around at the end. Ken, you go just like I do, and you cover teams other than the Winnipeg Jets on the road all the time. There's tons of examples of captains and teams and players around the league that are very self-critical, are very capable of telling you everything that they did wrong in that game because they're confident they will turn around and be better and correct it next game. I would far prefer to know. Now, maybe the Jets know it. Maybe behind the scenes, the Jets turn and look at each other and say, we sucked here, we sucked here, we sucked here, we sucked here, and we're going to be better at it. Maybe they do that, but we don't know that. Maybe in that room, they do exactly what they do to us. And they look at each other and say, guys, it's not as bad as it seems. And we did really good. We were right there. A couple posts goes a totally different way. It's a totally different game. Maybe they're saying that to each other. Maybe they're not properly self-reflecting, and we don't know that because they won't do it in front of us. They won't do it in front of the media. And maybe it's too much to ask for a team to be as open in the media as they are in front of themselves, but at least being open and about the stuff that is obvious would be a nice step for the fans, in my opinion.
No, it's totally fine. I mean, I'm just, again, my counter is how many players on the Avalanche did you hear saying we sucked last night, or we've sucked since the second period of game 2? I haven't had one. I don't think I heard one player say that so far. And Colorado is the favorite to win the Stanley Cup. I didn't see Nathan. I watched Brandon Saad's interview. He's a Stanley Cup champion. I only saw him talking about reiterating the positives, going back home. It's a best of 3 series.
Are you telling me that you've never covered a Stanley Cup champ before?
No.
That didn't call itself out?
We watched St. Louis, Sean. We were there for 2 rounds. I mean, they were hard on themselves. Craig Berube, I'm not sure there's a coach harder in the NHL on his own players, right? I mean,
exactly.
But it doesn't always work, is all I'm saying. I mean, you got to be true to yourself, and I would counter to what you're saying. I don't think for one second the Jets are sitting in the room saying it's all rainbows and unicorns by any stretch when it was going tough for them. But again, that's part of the problem. I mean, the other problem, and you know this, Sean, when you're in the room, sometimes you can have some off-the-record conversations with guys to say, microphone's off now.
Yeah.
Tell me about the D zone. Yeah. Like, how are you going to figure this out? Right now, when everything's on Zoom, I mean, it's the best that we have right now, but it stinks. Let's get real. I mean, Zoom interviews are antiseptic and not very liberating or revealing or enlightening. Even for players who are enlightening by nature. Watch Max Pacioretty's interview from last night. I mean, he played an unbelievable game again, but these guys, and if you're at a podium with 2 people, you're not even listening half the time. So how do you expect to get a good answer? And I'm not trying to be hard on Max Pacioretty. I'm just saying in general, I mean, one guy is almost always not paying attention. So, I mean, I think we're just all expressing a little bit of frustration, and I think that we're hopeful that once we get back to a little bit more normalcy, then maybe some of those things will be a little bit more forthcoming. I mean, somebody asked about Brian Little. We've had no update on Brian Little this year. I would be incredibly surprised if Brian Little was playing in the NHL next year or playing hockey at all. But we also know that Brian Little has not made an announcement like a Johnny Boychuk or like some of these other guys who are not actually going to retire, but that they consider their careers to be over, even though they'll continue to get paid and be on LTIR. But Brian Little, I always have said this, Brian Little was the conscience of the Winnipeg Jets. He wasn't afraid to point out flaws when the Jets weren't playing totally well, right, and not in a negative way or a finger pointing way. But when Brian Little, and Paul Stastny slid right into that role. But the difference is, if a guy's only available once a week, he's not going to be dropping that on you every week, right? I mean, I think that you're right. Paul Stastny got tired of thinking, what the hell are we doing here? We're too good to be playing like this, and we're going to get exposed at some point, which is why he opened his mouth before it got to a 7-game losing streak. That, to me, is a guy who's been on good teams. He's been on good teams in Vegas. He's been on good teams in St. Louis, been on good teams in Colorado.
Let me ask you this, and you guys would be the perfect people to ask because, for what we're talking about, being honest with themselves. If they were being as honest with themselves as you would hope that they would be, but we have no evidence of that in public, would Paul Stastny ever have had to step up and speak that way?
Yeah, exactly. Like, honestly, I think that Paul Stastny, I think, understands the culture of the team, understands that they don't vent that stuff in public. And I honestly think he just went rogue there. I think he was like, enough's enough. That's not working. So I'm just taking it into my own hands to do that because Paul Stastny, he's not a dumb guy. He's an extremely, extremely intelligent guy. He doesn't by accident come out and break the code. Paul Stastny is, Ken, we love to use this analogy. That was Paul Stastny's in emergency break glass moment. He came out and he thought, this isn't working, what you guys are doing, and I'm taking this decision out of your hands. And we know that. We know from the situation that created a buzz in the room behind the scenes that everyone else was left to deal with. And I think Paul Stastny knew that when he went up there and did that, he would create that exact situation where it would force players, coaches, everyone in the organization to address what he said was going on. And when those players did address what was going on, they said the exact same thing. They've been getting away with it. They hadn't been playing the right game for a long time. And I think, Huss, that was the perfect question to drive home this point, because Paul Stastny doesn't do things by mistake. You don't get to 1,000 games and be a leader like he is by doing things by mistake. Everything he did in that was calculated, and it is one of the very few times we can think of and remember someone from the Winnipeg Jets coming out and calling out their team's play. And how refreshing was that?
And everyone agreed that it was necessary, and it was probably something that, helped the Jets in a real positive fashion going forward. And, I kind of, from my perspective, I loved it because I thought that it needed to be said. I thought that it had a good effect. And I really do believe that, like with anything, if you can be publicly accountable for something, or you have to be, it pushes you towards making sure that you're going to be ready to, stand up and own whatever you're doing, usually in a good way. And that's why, to me, the pressers after game 2 and game 3 to me were so frustrating and so disappointed because, we're hearing these things, like our game, there's a lot of good things in the game. And then you go back and rewatch the game and going, I can't think of one thing, literally one thing that, I'll put this to anyone in the chat room. Other than the face-off circle, with the Jets did pretty well, is there any aspect of the game, and we can maybe take out goaltending because I think Hellebuyck had so much more work. I think he was close to what Price did. But was there any aspect of the game that the Winnipeg Jets were even close to the Habs in this series? I can't think of one. Yeah. And you know what? If you don't accept that and you can't be honest with yourselves about that, expect more of the same going forward.
Yeah, a couple quick things just on the Stastny light. One thing we also know, guys, from how public Paul Stastny, it's also not an accident that Paul Stastny has said on numerous occasions this year in interviews, both with myself and publicly, I've had bad coaches, and we know that he doesn't believe Paul Morrissey is a bad coach. So for me, I don't think for 1 second that he had to put the coaching staff on blast, because he knew that the coaching staff already felt that way, but maybe he felt the coaching staff wasn't going to say it publicly, so he brought it upon himself to do it. So that's why I would counter by saying, I don't think for a second Paul Morrissey was sitting in the video room saying, you know what, if we keep playing like this, we're going to be cruising down the stretch. I think sometimes coaches want some of those negative. I'm not saying Paul Morrissey wanted a 7-game losing streak, but sometimes you need a string of losses to give your own team a wake-up moment to know that you can't play that way.
He said exactly that. I mean, I always said publicly, he came on with us, last week or whatever, said, listen, the timing of this, as bad as and ugly as it was, I mean, it was every aspect, 5-on-5 play, special teams, puck management, all of those things had significantly slipped, and they needed to get it back. And they sort of did need to sort of hit rock bottom, which we sort of saw in that week in between the losses to the Edmonton Oilers on the Monday, the 6-1, and then blowing that 2-1 lead in Montreal on the Friday night. To me, that's sort of where it happened. And what Paul Stastny did, I think the team needed. And, again, just it is sort of, guys, it just seems like that is the culture of the team when it comes to, speaking to the media and talking about losses. And I sort of laugh. I mean, I was thinking about, can you imagine if the shoe was on the other foot and the Jets were handling the Montreal Canadiens the way they had done, and then the captain of the Habs showed up after game 2 or game 3 and told the Montreal media, we like our game. We're really close. Yeah. This is right there. I mean, would have been a little different than what we saw here. I'll say that much.
Ken, it's funny. Someone just sent me a text. Bruce Layden, a buddy of mine from CBC, with an audio file called "Wake Up." It makes me think. It makes me think that I want to get a MP3 of your voice, and when you text me, that's what I want my phone to say. Just wake up, just every once in a while. That's what I want to hear.
It's like the head. Hang on, it's like the head shake meme that Remus made after I was on Hustler's show.
What? Yeah, that was great.
Throw that on with it. Heck, I'm sure you could get in a ringtone or alarm tone with that.
Remus is on here.
Alarm tone.
Remus, get that in the chat, man. Get the head shake in the chat right now. Give people something to laugh about.
Let's go. What they want. Hey,
that was the reaction. That was my reaction when I heard we liked our game after game 2 and game 3. Insert Ken Weeb gif here, please, right now.
I'm gonna
Sorry,
do a
Sean.
little-
What did you decide about your flight? Do you need to get this wrapped up or what?
This is what I was going to talk about now. I was going to do some upfront producing. I've got to be.
I'm
at
ready.
the
No,
airport
it's good. We can go.
No, hold on. I got to be
Or
at the
us.
airport in 3 hours. I'm not going to sleep. So, like, you guys call this. I'm just going to keep doing this. The only time I'll have to get cut off is when I have to pack. So I'll go as long as you guys want to go. Don't worry about it because I'm not getting to sleep at this point. You're going to see me at work tomorrow. My eyes are going to be like this from the coffee that everyone's making fun of. The
stand-ups will look great.
Here, so, yeah, I'll have put a couple toothpicks in there to hold them open. But Kenny, I'm going to let you make the call. So you just tell me in the chat when. Listen, Kenny, in the private chat, tell me when it's done, and I'll take the fall for it. You don't have to do it because Ken doesn't like to quit, right? I've challenged him. Now he doesn't want to quit, so he's like, "Well, I'm not quitting tonight." So, anyways, Ken, you do it. You do what you got to do.
I'm just not sure how much. I think we should probably save some stuff for as the weekend.
I'm going to ask you one last thing before you go, and I'm going to ask you something because Huss did a phenomenal job of answering this at the top of the show. Who did the Jets need more from? Just give me your list.
Oh boy, it's a long list. I mean, I'm not sure where you would stop on that. I think that if you're looking at the series, I think that probably the only player that gave the Jets enough, I mean, Connor Hellebuyck would be probably at the top of that list. That's a good one. I thought that Lowry was great this series. I think the effort was there from Nikolai Ehlers. I don't think that. Here's the biggest surprise for me is that Ehlers didn't have a bigger impact, and I'm not knocking him. This is not a criticism of his. He was trying hard. He was skating like an absolute machine. He was drawing penalties.
Yeah, drew a lot of penalties. Yeah.
His inability to get, I don't think he had one assist in the series on an extra attacker play. I think that I'm surprised by that. And again, I'm not pointing. I think that Ehlers is an incredible player. He had an incredible year. I just expect, like when Scheifele went down, I thought it would be a natural time for Ehlers to basically say, "Get on my back and roll." I think he tried his best to do it, but it just didn't happen for him. And I think that. He is such a driven individual. He made incredible strides again this year. I think Nikolai Ehlers is going to eclipse 40 goals next year. I'm going to throw that down now. Boy. You can mark him down for 40 plus.
Receipts.
You can keep the receipts on that especially.
What are the chances he cracks the top power play?
Well, good question. I think
that's going back to a very early Kenny and Renny talk. That's one of the very first Kenny and Renny talks we had, Ken.
Yeah,
sorry,
for sure. No, it's okay. But after that, Kyle Connor needed more. Blake Wheeler needed more. We know it's incredible. We saw it 2 years in a row. When Mark Scheifele went down, that line's effectiveness dipped dramatically. Kyle Connor had 1 goal in the series. It came with an extra attacker. After Mark Scheifele went down, he had no points. Blake Wheeler had no points in the series. It's not just about points, but they didn't generate enough. And the problem for Kyle Connor is that he ended up on the wrong side of the highlight reel on more than several occasions, including the game-winning goal in Game 2, which ended up being, is there a bigger turning point in the series than that shorthanded goal?
Yeah.
I can't find one.
Yeah.
And Sean and I talked about this. I think that Kyle Connor did everything right except finish the play. He made the right read. He went to the right person. But the worst case scenario for him had to be take a slashing penalty and slash Tyler Toffoli's stick out of his hands. A one-handed flyby that's not going to cut it if you're trying to win the Stanley Cup. And we know, I've said this a ton of times. If you put up 40 goals, you get some leniency when it comes to defensive play, but that was a play that's a pivotal play in this season, right? That's something he needs to. I think he's worked on his board play. He needs to continue to work on it. But that to me, that's the turning point of the entire season, right there. The inability to finish that play is a costly moment for the Jets that they just can't get back, right? Of course they've been swept now, but finding a way in a 0-0 game to not give up a shorthanded goal when you made the effort to get the back check. I know it's at the end of a long shift, but if you go that far, you got to finish the play. And that's something that the Jets need to continue working on. Again, on the back end, I don't think any of the Jets defensemen had a good series, to be quite frank. I think Neil Pionk's effort level is exceptional, but this is my whole point from the very beginning. I understand why they split the two players up, but by splitting Josh Morrissey and Neil Pionk up, neither one of them had a good series, right? And I'm not pointing the finger at them, but they're the best two defensemen on the Winnipeg Jets, and neither one of them played at a level of a Shea Weber or a Ben Sherratt or a Jeff Petrie or a Joel Edmondson. So, it's a long list. I mean, the Jets play. If we're doing player rankings, there's not a lot of Jets in the top 10, right? Of the best players in this series.
It's a light power poll
right?
For round two.
And to punch the opponent in the face, metaphorically speaking, the Canadiens' quote unquote fourth line outperformed the Jets' first line. Goodness. Outperformed the Jets' first line, right? So you're not gonna win a series when the fourth line outperforms the first line. And I mean, hey, there's egg on my face for this, Sean. I said this would be a series where Nick Suzuki maybe gets taken to school by Mark Scheifele. I know Mark Scheifele's not there, but the Canadiens kids took the Jets to school. Kotkaniemi, outstanding series. Suzuki, outstanding. Who sets up the winning goal?
Yeah.
The guy who, after being kind of called out for not getting enough shots, well, what did he do? Acted like a water bug out there and generated offense. I mean, there was a play where he turns it over accidentally with the pass behind the player. Jets go back the other way, but they can't convert, right? So the inexperienced mistakes that the Canadiens made didn't end up in their net, but the experienced players' mistakes ended up in the Jets' net, and that's one of the other big issues of this series as well, is that for all the protection and leaning on the veterans they got outperformed by the kids.
Okay, let's shut this thing down. Let's land this thing. First, I want to say I agree entirely in the chat with whoever had said Sherratt and Armia were better than any other Jets. I completely agree with that. I wanted to touch on this.
One quick thing, though. Ben Sherratt was not traded. He signed as a free agent. He chose to go to Montreal. I mean, the Jets made him a competitive offer, but if they had known Byfuglien wasn't back, they would have raised the offer. I mean, that's my counter to there. But, I mean, the Jets definitely missed Sherratt. There's no doubt about that.
I'd seen it said in here, I think Jeff Hamilton says this as well, about the North Division champ getting slaughtered. I'd said this on my hit with Eric Engels. We talked about this. I think the Canadiens are legit. I'm not saying that they're going to win. I'm not saying that by any means. But I think if they play the way they're playing in the blueprint that they're playing, I don't think they're an easy out. I still think, and I called it, I still think Colorado comes through. I still think Colorado goes to the Stanley Cup final. You think
that's where we differ, yes.
That's where we differ. You think Vegas is going to go through, but I don't
think it's a cakewalk, though. I'm with you. It's not a cakewalk.
Exactly. I think give the Montreal Canadiens their due. They shut down for 3 straight games the Toronto Maple Leafs right when they needed to. They handled the Jets entirely. We got to give them a shout out for that. I got to give Raymond Navante, Razor, who's always up and down our chat room, some credit. Razor told me way back in February, I'm not worried about the Edmonton Oilers and I'm not worried about the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm worried about the Montreal Canadiens. And he said it when the Montreal Canadiens were at their absolute lowest. He said he recognized something in their style that didn't jive with the Jets. Give it to Razor. He called it early. That was great. And I see people asking about K&R in our off-season, what we're planning. First off, after Garbage Day or on Garbage Day, we're going to figure this out. We're going to get it out to people, but we're going to have a season breakdown. We're going to have guests. We're going to get going on this. We want to have a breakdown. We want to talk about all the stuff, future of the GM, future of the coaches, what we think the teams need to do, off-season moves, all that kind of stuff. We'll dig into all that kind of stuff. We'd love to have you there with it. And then other than that, we're our plan, Ken, and I don't think we can totally formulate it later, but we plan to stay busy and we plan to keep putting stuff out there for everyone to jump on. So if you have any issues or any kind of issues or questions that you have that you think that we could dig into, send them to us either through Twitter or in this forum here or our emails if you can find them. I don't feel like digging them up right now. And we'll try and build shows on that kind of stuff. We're going to keep rolling. Hopefully we can spend some time on Winnipeg Sports Talk with our man Hustler here, who we're so happy joined us today and who's been such a champion of the K&R show. And I got got to say this. We did something the other day. We did our Kenny and Renny long form podcast, and you threw to us the other day at Huss. It was obvious the bump that we got from you, and just it means a ton that someone with the clout that you have in the market goes to bat for us. Means a ton to us. We really do appreciate it.
Well, listen, I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. I always love coming on afterwards. I was glad that there was an hour between the game and coming on. Some of the reasons why at the post game sometimes it's a little too fresh. But listen, shout out to everyone. I've seen a lot of familiar faces from the Winnipeg Sports Talk chat supporting Kenny and Renny, which is great to see. If you're a post gamer that hasn't seen what we're doing, we're 1 o'clock every day. To about 2:45, 3 o'clock on YouTube, Winnipeg Sports Talk. Just simply put it in after that, hit the subscribe button, and of course you can get in all your podcast feeds as well. And certainly I hope you guys are regular visitors, and it's certainly no shortage of storylines to talk about this hockey team coming out of this series. And the great thing is, guys, we are into June. We're going to be at Canada Day before we know it. We've got an expansion draft, a draft, free agency, and this is going to be a fascinating and I think pivotal offseason for the Winnipeg Jets, with way more questions about the roster than I think we've had in previous years. So,
totally agree.
So bring it on. You guys keep it up. I mean, hopefully on Thursday we'll have one of you guys on the program. And shout out to everyone for supporting us, supporting KNR, and of course the IC guys, everyone that's sort of picking up the pieces of the sports talk scene in Winnipeg after what happened 3 months ago. We appreciate the support. It's great to see everybody here, and it was a lot of fun chopping it up with you guys on this final game of what was a really interesting season.
Awesome show tomorrow, Huss. This is awesome. Yeah, for sure. And Raymond Loaders, I'm not ignoring your question, but we're going to dive more into coaching and future stuff later on. So we're not ignoring it.
We'll get into it. Thanks, Huss. If you haven't checked out Winnipeg Sports Talk, do yourself a favor and get on that, because Huss is kicking ass every single day. And the last thing I want to say, thank you so much to our chat room. I'm not saying this is goodbye, but while we have you all here, you guys are the secret sauce to this show. You are the absolute best. You drive our shows. You bring the questions. We go in the direction you send us in, and you went way above and beyond with all the stuff that you did. Our logo comes from you. Our songs, Kenny's entry music comes from you. Again, you are the secret sauce. We are so lucky to have had, the commitment that we see from so many of you time and time again coming out. When we see names we recognize, it means so much to us. Thank you so much for being there. As a little bit of not a carrot, as a treat at the end of the show, we're going to bring up some of Tristan Rivers' music. I'm going to play both Sean's headband and Ken's entry music to end this show and to close it out. Shut it down here today. Thanks you for joining us. Everybody. We're going to see you after Garbage Day and a breakdown of the season. Come join us at that time. Other than that, have a great night, everybody. I'll see you back in Winnipeg. Let's rock this joint.